NSFW, Redditors who lived in secluded towns. What's the darkest thing that has ever happened in your town that everyone knew about but never talked about? In my hometown there was a girl who hid her pregnancy from everyone. She gave birth in her family home while everyone was out but hemorrhaged and fainted. Her dad found her and took her to hospital where they proceeded to ask him where the baby was. He didn't know she was pregnant but went back to the house to find the baby. He found the baby in a bucket in the cupboard. She had stabbed it multiple times with manicure scissors. She claimed it was dead on delivery but the autopsy proved otherwise. She was arrested and spent a few months in a mental institution before being released back to my hometown. Somebody owned a pub and killed his wife and bricked her into the wall. She was reported missing. 30 years later they were renovating the pub and found her, but at that point her husband had died. Edit. I've left a link to the article I found. Thank you for the silver. About 9 years ago, a guy lost his job at a nearby Kaiser, so he killed his 5 children and wife and then turned the gun on himself. Before he shot himself he faxed a letter to a news station explaining that the tough economic times we were living in left him no other choice, and also apparently indicated that he and his wife had agreed to this murder-suicide pact weeks before it happened. They had pulled their older children out of school and everything. A girl at my high school went missing. Then about 2 months later the paper ran a story about how a local girl was abducted, taken to Mexico and gang raped, sodomized, and several other graphic details. That girl showed up at school. She was there about 5 minutes before everyone connected the dots and she had to leave. It was sad as it at the time. It's even sadder now that I am grown up and understand what happened. My small town paper is an asshole. Girl in my neighborhood was tied to a tree, raped by multiple boys, and left there overnight, completely naked, until one of the neighbors found her in the morning. No one talked about it. Nothing was ever done. I used to live in remote Australia. A body of a girl about 17-18 turned up in the middle of nowhere. I mean nowhere. The nearest house was 40 km away. The road was red dirt. Some drovers found her nearly decomposed. No one knows who she is. No one knows where she came from. The only theory they have is that a river flooded and brought her down from Darwin and she's more than likely an international tourist. We don't talk about it because there is literally no town. And no one in it to talk about it to. One of the elementary school teachers was molesting kids. He went on a Wednesday night in March hunting trip with a bunch of the kids' dads. There was a terrible accident, and the teacher did not survive. The mandatory sheriff's investigation found no sign of foul play. Weird name for a hunting trip. My dad getting arrested for child abuse was the giant scandal. Pretty much everyone was supportive for the most part, which I don't hear a lot of for small towns. Landlord went easy on my brother for rent until he got situated. People would periodically bring food to check on us, and it never felt like gossip reckon. 2 terrible things occurred. A very popular boy hung himself from a swing set in a town park. He was 17. At that time there had been a couple suicides of young boys in our area, but this one really took people by surprise. Funeral was terrible. He had one older brother and a sister. About 3 or 4 years later the older brother hung himself at the same place on the anniversary of his brother's suicide. Terrible. My friend's 21 years old sister was murdered in her house on Christmas. Came home from celebrating with family to find someone robbing her house. He beat and murdered her with a baseball bat. Ended up to be a kid she went to HS with. He ended up killing himself in jail. It's been 10 years and it's still difficult to talk about. Recently divorced father went to ex-wife's house, killed her and her new boyfriend, then shot himself. All in front of his kids. Also, another guy kidnapped a girl, killed her, raped her dead body, then chopped her up and dumped the remains. Edit. This is 2 separate people. Dude. You need to move. It's cool. He's dead now. Family up the road from me seemed like nice people, always friendly. Owned a business within the area, everyone knew them. But they all seemed kind of off or strange. I don't want to use the term, but it was apparent they were all a variation of slow to a degree. One day news broke that the father had been sexually molesting his two daughters, I think 17 and 13, for God knows how long. Guy was never formally convicted due to lack of evidence, so he remains an outsider and out of the town. I believe his kids were sent to CPS immediately. Not in my city but in my family. My great uncle Norm was a Vietnam veteran and he brought home a sweet Vietnamese wife. They were very happy for some time. He taught her English and she was very crafty. They had two sons that he loved very much. When the sons got older, she became jealous of how much time he spent with them and how much he loved them. She became mean and resentful. Spiteful. He started finding old meat and bugs in his lunches. And when he started bringing his own lunches, she would stalk him at work and try to give him lunches she made. She started ripping apart the house for him to come home and clean up. And didn't feed her sons even though she was the housewife. He filed for divorce. And when he left for work after handing her the papers, she stabbed her sons to death, doused their bodies and herself in rubbing alcohol, and lit herself on fire. He was absolutely devastated. As a kid I wondered why he was such a zombie. And when I got older, my father told me what happened to him. I would probably be an emotional husk too. A decently popular Chinese restaurant in town had one of the owner's babies walk out the back door and disappear. It was fucking heartbreaking. The parents on TV and all in the paper. There was a big search effort. Eventually they found the baby's body stuffed into one of the cabinets at the restaurant. Pretty sure the place is still open. The mother had beaten the baby to death. I looked into it, serving 22 years then being deported. The place is closed. The cleaner at my old primary school hung himself right in the middle of the hall where all the assemblies and such took place. Needless to say, school was cancelled for a few days. The town pastor was allegedly touching the altar children, both boys and girls. It was dug up because apparently some of the kids told their parents about it, but the parents either didn't believe them or didn't care enough to stop this from happening. So this went on for a while and less people went to church except for the hardcore devotees, which were usually the parents of the children. So until those kids grew up they were forced to be sexually abused by their parents and no adult did anything about it, and I believe the same pastor is still there to this day. When I was a kid in the west of Ireland, there was a guy in his 20s who used to cycle past our school at the same time every morning. No. This isn't going the direction you think it's going. The story I was told was that this young man as a teenager had been an only child living on a small isolated farm with his widowed mother. He was 18 and he was basically running the farm on his own. One day the guy snapped and beat his mother over the head with a blunt instrument and killed her. The people of the small village he lived in felt sorry for the boy. They thought he was a good kid. They felt that the mother had been an ogre who had made his life hell, and what happened was very much out of character. So the murder was covered up on condition. The local priest stipulated that the boy cycled about 15 miles every morning to a very well-known Marian shrine and said an act of contrition for what he had done. Woman shot the guy that molested her son. In the middle of the courtroom. Movie was made about it. Even bumped into the woman at the store a few times. Have never heard anyone mention it other than the paper occasionally. So this guy's girlfriend found out that he was going back to his home country to get married. She goes into a fit of rage and ends up murdering him. Loads his body into a blender. Cooks up a meal and serves it to construction workers and fed the remains to neighborhood dogs. Dead guy's brother is concerned, so visits girlfriend and finds a tooth in the blender and suspects a murder, thus alerting the police. She was arrested. Today on Will It Blend? Someone got murdered in this secluded rundown bar a few minutes down the road and their body was dumped in the lake. Despite everyone usually knowing everything and everybody, nobody would speak of it. A guy living here was pretty well known in our community. Just because he socialized with everyone a lot. Anyway, sadly he was suicidal. He went up to the moor and shot himself with a shotgun. Now, we have 2 police officers in our village. And he was friends with them. So he put sticky notes all over his house and some of them demanded that those officers were to not attend the scene. Some police from the nearest town were looking for his location, but didn't know the area. So they called the police from my village to show them where it may be. They hadn't been told what they were going to. So when they arrived and saw their dead friend, well, I can imagine it being a horrible sight. In the small town I live in northern NB, 2 small boys were strangled in their sleep by a snake. The man who owned the reptile store had an undocumented python upstairs that was about 6 feet. His kids spent the night and it had gotten out of its enclosure, which was way too small and not secured properly. I don't remember what happened to him. If you want to know more, look up Reptile Ocean Campbellton. My town had a naughty boys school called Boys Town. Yes, Oz is the lottery mob. This was a boys only boarding school run by priests and brothers. The kids there were either too naughty for mainstream public schooling and the local Catholic school, or kids from the system with no families. The school holds Australia's top position for most claims of sexual assaults against a church organization. Every one of those claims of the underage variety. The school has been shut since 2004 and was recently demolished. Local business owners won't touch the land. Local churchgoers refuse to talk about it and get angry if you do. Local Aboriginal elders have refused opportunity to use the area for cultural events because it's now bad soil. Developers have recently bought it and will put larger businesses in that land, and you can bet your bottom dollar most long-time locals won't even go there to shop. I'm in band. My school used to do this thing called winter percussion. It's like winter guard, but with drums. One of the male instructors molested a 15-16-year-old female student, maybe raped her IDK. But there were pieces of carpet taken for the trial throughout the back band rooms. You could go in there and still see the pieces of carpet missing, and we don't have a winter percussion anymore. Edit, words. And I'm from Indiana.